I love naturopaths, and seeing a naturopath has been a really key part of my thyroid health management over really the last 20 years. And Sharon Wilford, who's my guest today, has been a very key naturopath and friend to me over that time. One of the things I love about having a naturopath as part of my thyroid support team is that a naturopath looks at you as a whole person. And as Sharon says on her website, what naturopathy does is it combines scientific research and clinical expertise to offer an effective, personalised, natural health solution and a standard of care that you can trust. And one of the things I love about Sharon is that not only does she have the tools in her toolkit that you would expect from a naturopath, like herbs and supplements and diet, but she has done so much more training and has so many more skills in her toolkit. So as we're chatting today about her approach to managing thyroid patients, we also cover some of the deeper work like neuro-emotional techniques and Neurolink. And so she's going to tell us a little bit about those, along with her general approach to how she would manage a thyroid patient that comes into her clinic. And having been one, I can certainly test to Sharon's expertise, her kindness, her professionalism, and her ability to really treat people as a whole person. So enjoy my conversation with Sharon. And if you want to get in touch with her, head to sharonwilfordnaturopathy.com, where you can find out a bit more about her, connect with her, and perhaps even book into her clinic in New Farm in Brisbane if you want to see her as a patient. Enjoy this conversation today. Welcome to Let's Talk Thyroid, where we explore different aspects of living a healthy thyroid lifestyle, positively and practically, to help you thrive and not just survive. Join me, Annabelle Bateman, your host, and let's talk thyroid. Removing typically inflammatory foods can make a massive difference for our thyroid health, but it can also seem completely overwhelming and almost impossible. I mean, how do we do without gluten, grains, dairy, sugar, legumes? Oh my gosh. Well, I have taken the overwhelm out of it and packaged together all the steps to show you exactly how, and I guide you through it in a 30-day wellness challenge. So if you want some help to overhaul your diet and see just how good you could feel, check out my 30-day wellness challenge link in the show notes. Welcome, Sharon, to the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast.
Thank you, Annabelle, for having me.
That is my pleasure. And look, before we get into chatting all things thyroid from a naturopath's or from your perspective as a naturopath, I just want my listeners to know that you're my friend. You've been my naturopath on and off for a long time, probably.
A long time, yeah.
Probably about
15 years.
Yeah, probably. So, so you have been a really important part of my thyroid support team over the years. And so, I want to thank you for everything that you have poured into me, the encouragement you've given me, just the tools to understand diet and the foods that haven't worked for me. You were the one that gave me encouragement to try cooking different things. And, I remember you saying, I was talking about it actually today. I was writing some posts about going gluten-free. And I'm like, well, I remember Sharon saying, Annabelle, come on, you like cooking, you like food, you can do it. You just got to focus on what you can have. So,
that's right.
So you might not remember saying that. That is good advice. So I just wanted to say thank you for all of what you've given to me and helping me with my health. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. Yeah, you're welcome.
That's okay. And, I love you as my friend as well. So,
well, that is mutual, definitely.
And so, Sharon, let's take a dive into how, you approach thyroid patients that come into your clinic. You're a naturopath, you've got lots of tools at your disposal, but if you've got a new patient walking in who comes to you with a thyroid problem or thinks that they might, what's your approach?
All right. Yeah. Well, basically, whenever somebody walks through my door, I look at my patient, and there are some physical signs to look out for, which I'm always on the prowl for. So often people, when they don't know they have a thyroid issue, just the physical presentation can be an interesting thing. So one of the key things that we look out for is thinning of the lateral eyebrows and thinning hair, which you can often sort of see from that initial just physical inspection. The other thing we look for is any sort of swellings around the base of the neck, which could be a sort of mild goiter-like symptom. You can observe even what they're wearing. If it's a seemingly warm day and they're all rugged up, there's a lot of little hints that if you can pay attention, that can sort of just put it in the back of your mind to basically think, okay, we might be dealing with a thyroid issue. So that's the initial, is just that physical observation. And then, of course, thorough case taking. And if people come in and they've got all the many symptoms that are very common with thyroid, whether it be fatigue, low energy, hormone imbalance, goiter, thinning hair, sensitivity to the cold, difficulty losing weight, constipation, inflammatory conditions in their joints. There's a whole lot of clinical indicators that can sort of lead you in that direction. And we, like to do a lot of thorough questioning with my patients as well. So once we've established that, okay, there's a few clinical indicators looking like it's a thyroid condition, I then use, because I've trained in many different techniques over the years, and I've trained in applied kinesiology, which is a chiropractic technique where we use isopathic vials to assess and test using a muscle reflex response to identify if there's any hormone imbalances, food intolerances, gut problems, biochemical imbalances. So usually in my practice, I will test for thyroid hormones. And if the muscle indicator test does point to an underactive or sometimes overactive thyroid, that's when I send patients off for thorough thyroid blood testing. So we'll test for things like TSH, free T3, free T4, thyroid antibodies, thyroid receptor antibodies, and reverse T3. So I like to do that as a pretty standard test, but there's a lot of in-clinic tests that I go through before I put people to that expense, because it is a user pay kind of service.
Yeah. So naturopaths can refer for blood tests.
Yeah, absolutely. So I use QML in Queensland. So we have our own private referral forms, and QML will bill the patient. So obviously as a naturopath, and even GPs actually don't get a lot of these thyroid tests covered under Medicare unless they're following up with an existing medical condition. So yeah, we're able to send for a whole range of blood tests, but it is user pay. So which can be really helpful, because then we can really investigate things more thoroughly, knowing that, okay, you're not going to be blocked by your GP or Medicare if we want to do a little bit more extensive testing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm not sure that everyone would know that you can do that through a naturopath. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. No, it's a very useful link there to have that connection with QML.
Yeah. So once you say you get the test back and there is a thyroid problem, and I guess, maybe we can talk about them separately, but let's talk, Hashimoto's underactive thyroid.
Yeah.
Do you have, what would be the next step? Like, where do you go from there?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that not everybody with an underactive thyroid has Hashimoto's, interestingly enough. I know there's a lot of emphasis that most people with underactive thyroid has autoimmune, but I am always amazed at the amount of people who have what we call a subclinical hypothyroid, and yet their antibodies are within the normal range, or they're non-existent. So I'm often surprised by that, because I think, okay. So I think the basic treatment, if it's an underactive thyroid, it could be a nutritional deficiency. So it might be that the patient doesn't have adequate iodine levels to make their T4. They might be low in selenium, zinc, or iron, which affects the conversion of the T4 to the active T3 hormone. But if there's an autoimmune or Hashimoto's picture, we really have to focus on the gut. And so if I'm presented with blood work that comes back and we've got positive antibodies and then we've got, low T3, T4 hormones, my first step is I will Neurolink them. So I've trained in a technique, which is an osteopathic technique called neurological integration. And this is a really good starting point, which essentially I do this with all my patients. I want to make sure that the neural pathways from the brain to the body, the brain to the thyroid, and the brain to the gut are connected. So this technique basically identifies any of the neural short circuits, if you like, that are disconnecting, that is stopping the body or the organ systems from functioning optimally. I use this technique to reconnect the nervous system first because I want their body to be in the best position possible to be able to heal itself. So I'll Neurolink them. So that's a technique in itself.
So tell me a bit more about that and what would cause neural pathways to be blocked. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So Neurolink or neurological integration system, as it's known, is basically using a muscle test, and we can identify where the neural pathways, say, for example, if there's a short circuit between the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, we can use a muscle test and a series of protocols, if you like, that can assess whether there's a disconnect there. And if there is a disconnect, the muscle response test that we use will actually turn a strong muscle into a weak muscle. So we'll get a muscle reflex response. Then there's a few other steps that we use to reconnect and tell the brain that, hey, there's a short circuit here and you need to reconnect that. And this is a technique that was founded by Dr. Alan Phillips, who's an osteopath, a New Zealand osteopath who's been doing this for over 30 years, but he's extensively studied neurophysiology and he's constantly scouring the research and evolving to identify ways to unlock the body's neural connections, if you like. So this technique continues to develop and evolve as he uncovers more research and when we find out more information about how the body and the nervous system works. So we assess the body using a reflex test and we integrate that information back to the brain to reconnect the circuits using a temporal tapping technique where we tap on the lobes of the brain, the left and right hemisphere. So it's sort of a tapping tapping technique, I should say, that helps to get the body back online.
Okay.
In a nutshell.
And so,
or not.
I know, I'm sure it's far more complex than that. But, this is about trying to explain it to the average person, which is me. So, with do you see common, I don't know, blockages, I'm not sure if that's the right term, in thyroid patients? Do you see common things there?
Yes. Why does the body short circuit? That was one of your questions. And one of the most common short circuits on the nervous system is a virus and viral burden. So viruses are incredible life forms and they can do incredible damage to the nervous system. So one of the most common things that I will see with many patients, not just thyroid or Hashimoto's patients, is there's a lot of undetected virus in their body that their immune system hasn't actually detected and corrected or gone to attack. So common viruses, which we can't identify what the virus is doing Neurolink, but we can identify that there is a virus and it's affecting this organ or that system. And the most common one we see is Epstein-Barr virus, glandular fever. And so often if someone has a really heavy viral load, I'll send for blood work too, just to say, look, let's see if you have been. I muscle test for it as well. I've got an Epstein-Barr vial that I use. But sometimes the blood work can also help confirm, have you been exposed to Epstein-Barr in the past? Often people don't even know, but they might have had a viral burden. It might have been confused as a flu or a cold, and it could have been a multiple viral load on their body.
I think that was me.
And that's really common.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was me too. I had multiple viral burden, which is what drew me to Neurolink in the first place.
Okay, so it's often the virus that creates that blockage, and you think, and that's not thyroid specific. You see that a lot.
It's not, but often thyroid specific, but very common.
Yeah, and that viral trigger infection connection is a pretty common trigger for thyroid issues, isn't it? So I guess that fits. Yeah. Okay, so start there, give our nervous system a good go of being connected and flowing properly. Is that like a one-off thing, or is that something that needs to be done on a regular basis? How does that work?
Well, I use the analogy, it's like servicing your car. Do you know, I often, and I have people that come in, when I Neurolink patients, that's what they love. You know, they feel a difference. They feel sharper, more alert, more energy. And so usually what we recommend is doing a service, if you like, and getting a Neurolink checkup every 3 months. Because every 3 to 4 months, your cells completely turn over. So it's always a good opportunity to reconnect. Stress will disconnect the nervous system. So if people are really stressed out, that will disconnect them. If they've had a viral burden, that will disconnect them. If they have a bump to the head or trauma, that will disconnect them. Insomnia will disconnect them. So there are a few things that push the body beyond its homeostatic limits. And that's when we see things start to fall apart. So every 3 months is always a good idea.
So what does that mean, homeostatic limits?
So basically homeostasis is essentially the body's wanting to maintain balance. It's wanting to, so homeostasis is if you have an injury, for example, the body detects that injury and goes to work to heal it, to bring you back to balance. And your body is designed to it's designed to win. You know, that's how we're designed to win. You're not designed to cut your skin and have it just a weeping wound forever and ever. It's designed to heal. It's designed to detect imbalance and bring it to back to health. When we push our body beyond its ability to maintain homeostasis and bring the body back to healing or to health, that's when the body starts to decline, if you like, because those natural healing systems or mechanisms have been short-circuited, and the body then struggles to come back to good health. So Neurolink can be very helpful with bringing balance back. It's one of the tools. So once I've done that, then I go to work doing the nutritional correction.
Yeah, you mentioned before that gut was really important. Tell me more about that. Why is that? When you've got a thyroid patient, why is gut important?
Yeah. So the gut is the interface between you and the outside world. So it's basically a tube that runs from your mouth all the way out the other end. And so if it's to protect you from pathogens and proteins that are not meant to be circulating into your bloodstream directly. So the gut is that protective barrier that allows micronutrients to be absorbed, things like proteins, carbohydrates, fats to be absorbed through the gut wall so that these nutrients can be effectively delivered to the cells. And it also protects you from things that like viruses and toxins and parasites and yeast from getting circulated into your bloodstream as well. So the gut is that protective barrier. Now, when we see people with autoimmune conditions, it usually means that the gut has, or the gut junctions, the little fixtures that keep the cell walls tightly fixed, they become separated. So therefore we see that the cells become damaged and holes, if you like, start to form, and the gut can become a bit like a sieve. So when you've got a sieve for a gut, that means larger protein molecules can be absorbed into the bloodstream, or toxins and waste materials can actually go through the gut into the bloodstream and cause havoc. Now, if you have a permeable gut wall.
So that's leaky gut. That's what people refer to as leaky gut?
Yeah, we try to move away from that term now. For some reason, it's a little bit controversial in our field these days.
Oh,
but yeah, basically
okay.
like a leaky gut.
It's hard to keep up, isn't it?
It's hard to keep up.
I still call it a leaky gut. Obviously, I'm behind the times.
And I think that's sort of a good elemental way to look at it. But when you've got undigested proteins in your bloodstream, that alerts your immune system. Your immune system goes, hang on, there's a foreign body here. This shouldn't be here. So it amps up the immune attack, if you like, on these proteins to attack and destroy, because your body says, no, that shouldn't be circulating. Now, some of these proteins, particularly proteins that we find in gluten and proteins that we find in casein, those proteins can sometimes mimic or look a little bit similar in nature to your thyroid tissue and to your thyroid hormones. So when your immune system is amped up to attack these proteins, sometimes that amped up immune system can turn on your own body tissue. So that's why healing the gut wall and treating the gut is so important with autoimmune, because we want to stop these foreign particles and toxins from circulating so that we can settle the immune system down. So healing the gut is first and foremost. And of course, eliminating some of those foods that we know aggravate inflammation in the gut and therefore in autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's. So we always avoid gluten in this instance, because there's just been so much sort of clinical evidence over the years to show that people improve when they remove these foods.
Yeah. And so, I mean, look, I was one of your patients that resisted going gluten-free many years ago. It took me a long time to get my head around that. Do you find that that's common?
Yeah. It's a big change. Yeah, it's a big change. And, I over the years, I work with people where they're at. I'm not an idealist. I don't expect people to transform overnight. It's their health journey. And it sounds a bit cliche, but it's something that it might mean, okay, let's start with some fundamental basics. Let's do some substitution. What can we exchange this food for this food, just to make your life a little bit easier? So I ease. Some people are ready. Some people are like, yeah, I'll do anything. I'm desperate. And the ones that are the sickest are the most compliant because they're desperate. And I get amazing results with people who are desperate. They'll do anything and they get really great results. It's the ones that are a bit unsure about the sustainability of that. And I'm okay with that, because like you, Annabelle, it is a journey.
It is, yeah.
And it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And then something clicks, like it did with you. Something clicks. You go, okay, no, actually, I have made the connection now with food and health, and it's tangible. And therefore, that's when people really make sustainable change.
So that's really helpful to think, well, we are all different and we have to be ready. That's certainly something I've realised. I needed to be ready, and it took time and information and education and multiple people, like yourself and Ellen, my doctor, and, multiple professionals, as well as my own reading and research, to get to the point where I understood why. And I guess, as you say, if you're really, really sick, you're more desperate to make those changes. But it's certainly something that now, like 6-7 years on, I forget sometimes that, it took me nearly 10 years to actually do it for good. So I have to remind myself that it's not easy. It wasn't easy for me Now it's easy, but it took time for that to happen. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, change does take time, and people need to often hear the same information 7 times before, it clicks.
Yeah, it's an interesting stat, isn't it?
Keep telling them. It is. You just got to keep telling them. That's right. And then someone else will say it, and I go, that makes sense. You go, I've been telling you that for years.
Yeah, human nature. We're curious,
right.
aren't we? We're curious people. So from a naturopathic point of view, and we're talking about gut healing, so removing some of those typically inflammatory foods, are there other things that we can do to heal our gut? Are there other tools in your naturopathic toolkit that you use, or how do you go about that with people?
Well, the way I personally practice is I really focus on individualized medicine approach. And so I do a lot of muscle testing. So obviously I'll get very specific with the foods that I'm testing. And for some people, it's random foods. Some people, they'll react to carrots. I had someone the other day who couldn't do carrots. It's like, wow, that's really strange. It's unusual. But everybody's so unique. Everyone has their own biochemical story, their own gut biome, their own stress load, their own genetics, epigenetics. So I use my testing kits and I muscle test people specifically. So I want to know what can they eat, what can't they eat. I want to know what nutrients does their thyroid need. Does their thyroid need selenium, or does it just need iodine? Does it need tyrosine? Does it need a combination? Do we need to get their iron levels up? Do we need to increase their zinc? The other issue is probiotics. And probiotics, I was always taught at uni, probiotics are like strains of dogs. There are thousands of them, and you don't want to get a Chihuahua to do the job of a Rottweiler, for example. We were always taught that at uni. So taking a general probiotic might not be the solution. So I want to know what strains of bacteria is your gut lacking, and what does it need to re-inoculate and restore balance? And is there a fungal overgrowth? Is there a parasite in there? Is there SIBO in there? So I want to correct and balance the gut biome with specific probiotics dependent on their own body. And then I use nutritional support in the form of supplements. And there are a variety of different nutritional thyroid supports that I use, because not one nutritional supplement fits everybody. You've really got to tailor it. Some people need certain things. So there's around 4 different formulas that I find can be quite clinically effective.
As in specific products or formulas of herbs, or what do you mean by that?
Well, I sometimes do herbs, like as a liquid herbal extract. So I am a herbalist, so sometimes we can do some basic thyroid, adrenal, gut supports in a herbal. But often people with thyroid issues need nutrients, supplemental nutrients, because they're not getting enough in their diet. So we supplement the diet with things like zinc or selenium or iodine or iron or magnesium or tyrosine. They're kind of the more common thyroid nutrients, specifically for thyroid hormone production. Yeah. But it's tailored to the person. There's no, okay, if you've got a thyroid issue, take this, because sometimes taking iodine can be
really damaging. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's certainly, I think I've advocated for a long time that if you know you have a thyroid problem, you should be regularly seeing your doctor, working in with a naturopath on a regular basis. It's not a DIY approach. And I suppose from a lot of the reading and research I've done, there are common threads, and so I'm fairly comfortable saying, look, commonly, here are the common foods that are inflammatory, like looking at gut is really important, but maybe, the next person with a thyroid problem doesn't have that specific gut issue, or maybe dairy is not a big deal for them, or so it is individual. There's some common threads, but getting that individual treatment. And I've got to say, from that food, intolerance or, gut health perspective, I've found that the muscle testing that you've done with me over the years has been incredibly helpful at shortcutting, that elimination style approach. And that's been really helpful. And it has changed over time as the gut has healed and, that. So I've found that a really helpful process.
Yeah, and that is the key thing, because when you muscle test somebody for foods or for nutrients, that's dynamic. That's a changing landscape. As your gut heals, as you say, your body might tolerate a lot more. As your stress levels decrease, your body's able to digest better. I mean, if you're in fight or flight mode constantly, you're not going to have rest and digest, and that in itself is going to be inflammatory for the gut. So that is something that's not set in stone. Not all food intolerance issues, not food allergy where you get anaphylactic reaction, but not all food. Even that can be, altered if you've got to really, work with the immune system. But that's another story. But food intolerances can change, so it is always good to get checked in and see where your body's at.
So you mentioned stress before, and as I understand it, stress is a much bigger issue for people with thyroid problems than I had realised. I think that's certainly something in the last few years that's become more apparent to me. So how do you see stress impacting someone with thyroid issues? What do you recommend, in terms of dealing with that stress response?
Well, from my clinical experience, and it's not always the case, but I think in the majority of cases that I've seen, stress is the precursor to developing a thyroid condition. Now, that could be a physiological stress like hormone changes too, whether it be puberty or pregnancy, menopause. That's a physical stress on the body. But what I've often found is it's common, and it's not the case for everybody, but it's common for the type A personalities to develop, not even type A personalities per se, but people who put a lot of pressure on themselves, and they just burn themselves into the ground because they haven't got balance necessarily, and they have to be really good at everything. And if they're studying, they've got to be really good at it. They've got to get the best marks. They've got to get the best job. They've got to be the best parent. They've got to be all things to all people. That will burn out a thyroid gland. And so I found that it's almost like they're up to their neck in it. It's a metaphysical thing. It's like, I feel like I'm drowning. I'm choking under the pressure. That's when a thyroid will go. So often we have to say, okay, we have to think differently about how you handle stress.
You need a personality transplant. You would never say that. You would never say that. I know that. But as a personality that is, somewhat fits within that framework, you can't, I joke about that. You can't change your personality, but it's being aware, isn't it? And
and being able to let go of things that you can't control and change. So I use a technique in my practice, another technique that I've trained in called neuro-emotional technique. And you know me, and I love this technique. That to me is where real transformation happens in people's health and their minds, and the body will follow the mind.
Yeah, I really want to dig into this emotional stuff with you because I know you're passionate about it and I know how important it is. So, let's dive right in. Tell us more.
Well, neuro-emotional technique basically is and it's a very well-researched technique. I'm so excited about this because I got the opportunity to go to Philadelphia in 2000 and what year are we? I think it was 2018, maybe 19. I think it was 2018. And they were celebrating their 30 years of neuro-emotional technique and celebrating also their clinical trials of how effective neuro-emotional technique, or NET, is on changing the brain. And their research, it was just confirmed what we as practitioners knew to be true. When you use something in your clinic over and over and thousands of times over, it works. But it's so wonderful to have a very well executed clinical trial to test the efficacy of it. So in a nutshell, this technique basically identifies where your body, your mind body, is storing stress or trauma or whatever. We can use a muscle reflex test to assess that where it's stored. We can use the testing to also identify what is the theme. And then we identify what is the emotion that is stuck in the body. And then we can identify when it got stuck in the body. And so we can really hone in on the trauma, the stress, the emotional short circuit, when it got stuck, and we can shift it very, very quickly and effectively from the body using holding the contact points of the organ that's involved and accessing a point on the brain that helps to connect with the limbic brain, which is that primitive emotional brain, if you like. So this technique, I think, is very effective in helping people with thyroid and any other condition, as you know. But people who are really stressed, and maybe they're carrying a lot of stress in their thyroid gland, that they're feeling lump in their throat constantly, or it might be they carry the emotion anywhere in their body, but it's affecting the thyroid because that affects cortisol. And we know cortisol, the stress hormone, interferes with the conversion of your thyroid hormones, converting T4 to T3. So cortisol, the stress hormone, could have been firing for years, and NET can help really reset that.
When you think about that driven, possibly perfectionist, tough on themselves,
hard on themselves
person, hard on themselves, do you see trends in, with the NET, are there patterns? I don't know if I'm asking the right question.
Look, it's an interesting question because, again, everybody is so different. And I think a common theme amongst the human race is not being worthy, not being good enough. And I think that can be a common theme with thyroid and many other conditions, to be perfectly honest. But it's often people, their thyroid blows out in times of really acute stress where they're just burning the candle. They're trying to do everything. They're trying to be all things for all people to prove that they're enough, and that pressure can blow out the thyroid, if you like. But there's no one specific emotional thyroid thing. But there is obviously a trend to, I have to be perfect at everything. I have to be really good at everything to be good enough and acceptable or worthy. And so that can be common.
From that stress point of view and that pressure, are there, aside from the NET, are there other things that you would, like practical tips you could give for how to help manage that day-to-day stress or that pressure that we put on ourselves?
Well, I find that when we do an NET session, the goal might be, I'm okay being good enough, or I am good enough right now, and I think a lot of the time, once we shift the belief systems in that subconscious brain, and it's the subconscious brain that we're not consciously aware of, but it drives our actions. It programs us. So the NET can reprogram the subconscious drivers or programs. And I find that once we clear a lot of that stuff within a session, there's nothing they have to do. It just changes. They go, I just feel different. I can't believe it, but I am not reacting the way I would normally react. And that's the beauty of NET. It's like now you don't actually have to go and spend an hour meditating and da-da-da-da. It just shifts. And just tapping in a little bit just to the research and how they measured the brain changing is they took I think there were 25 to 30 patients who had a similar traumatic experience, and the traumatic experience that they thought they could basically measure as a reasonably equal traumatic experience was getting a diagnosis of cancer. So all of these trial participants had been diagnosed with cancer, and they had to document the most traumatic experience about getting that diagnosis, whether it was the doctor carelessly telling them, look, you got cancer, you're going to die, you're going to this, you're going to that, you got to do this, whether it was going through the treatment, whether it was telling their family members, whatever the most traumatic experience was, they had to write their experience down on paper. They had to write their story step by step. Then what they did is they measured all of the participants. They hooked them up to a machine. I can't even remember what it's called off the top of my head, where they tested their pulse rates, their sweating, all that sort of thing. And they had somebody read their own story to them, and they measured the physiological changes. The cortisol surges were measured with saliva and all sorts of different things. Then what they did is they put them into an MRI, and they looked at their brain. So they put each participant into an MRI. They read their story. Someone read their story while they were in the machine. And it brought, it's acute. When you've had trauma, it is still very raw when you have to go there. So these poor participants, they were crying. The guy who was doing the MRI was really I felt really cruel going through this process. But what they were able to do is take photographs of the brain and where it was lighting up, where this trauma was actually stored in their brain when they were reading their stories to them, getting their brain imaging done. Then, after they had all this baseline data, they took half the group and did at least 3 to 5 NET sessions. And really, it's like that's where the miracles happen. You do the NET session, and basically it brings your body to neutral. It's like, okay, that story is now just a story. It doesn't even feel like my story. It just feels like, okay, yep, that's a story. I've got no emotional charge when I have to relive it. So they put all the participants back in the MRI, all 30 of them. Half of them had NET, half of them hadn't. Every single person that had NET, their brain did not light up at all. It was like their brain had changed. And so
So did they read the story to them again?
They read the same story.
Wow.
So before they read their traumatic story, they had to write a bland story about their morning routine. I get up, I have a coffee, blah, 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 which has no... So they read that story, look at the brain, then they read the traumatic story. And so in all of the recipients of NET, they were completely neutral and their brain did not fire up. All the stress centers that they were recording did not fire at all. They were just completely calm. Wow. But the people that hadn't received it, their brain did not change. It was exactly the same physiological brain response. We were all the stress centers of the body. So they did end up treating everybody. They gave everybody NET at the end of the study, of course. But that was just an amazing kind of watershed, if you like, in terms of proving that this technique works. And I love it because it, for a thyroid person, for any person really, as you can see. I love it.
So I guess if stress is, if you know that stress is a trigger for your, health, for flaring up thyroid or you know that you've had trauma. I know in a course I recently did through the Karatsian Institute, Dr. Karatsian talked about unhealthy relationships and trauma as being one of the identified triggers for autoimmune, specifically autoimmune thyroid, but I'm guessing autoimmune probably generally it impacts on that. Yeah. So, find an NET practitioner. Go see Sharon. Investigate that. It does. When you were talking before about NET, I'm curious, does EFT, the emotional freedom technique, that's another tapping technique, does that work in with that? Is it, I understand it's not the same, but I know there's a lot of freely available EFT stuff online. I'm wondering, is that if someone couldn't access NET practitioner, would that be something that you could use?
The difference is you kind of have to be aware of the problem to tap it out. And a lot of it with the NET, it's often a subconscious thing that you didn't even realize. So the NET can unearth that actually it's not really about this, it's about this. And this thing that you think it's about is just getting triggered because of this bigger event or experience. So EFT works beautifully when you know what you're getting triggered with or what your stress is. It can be very, very effective. And I still recommend EFT for something people can do at home. But the NET is just a more sort of powerful tool to unearth that, okay, what is actually getting triggered here?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Excellent. So, Sharon, is there something, that you use on a regular basis with your thyroid patients that we haven't talked about, or something that I haven't asked you about that you think the listeners might benefit from knowing?
Well, I mean, I guess, in a nutshell, if people did come to see me, they would get first a thorough case taking, then we'd do some muscle testing, then if necessary we would do some blood testing, and then we would Neurolink you and correct your diet and replenish the nutrition that needs to be there to support the thyroid. And then, of course, we address the emotional components. Then there's probably the other element that can be triggering a thyroid condition, and that's toxicity and heavy metals. That can be because some people get triggered by having mercury amalgams, even whether they have them in their mouth and the mercury vapor is ingested or breathed in, inhaled. That can settle in the thyroid. So thyroid gland can be toxic with heavy metals too. So I guess that's another element that we need to explore. If that showed up on a muscle test, we might even then need to do some heavy metal detoxification, chelation, that kind of thing. So that's when it gets a little complicated as well. Certainly there are some people, and I do want to stress this, they need thyroid medication. So I'll use the nutritional supplements, but there are some people who really benefit from thyroxine or what's the other one that we use? You remember the name of the other one? What's it called?
The NDT or T3?
No, I mean, some people do well with thyroid gland extract, but that can blow some people out. But some people do really well on that. But there are two T4 medications. There's thyroxine and there's Utroxig. Utroxig, yeah. And interestingly, they're meant to be the same, but when I've muscle tested people, some people are better on thyroxine, some people are better on Utroxig, and the doctors will say, no, they're exactly the same, but this obviously not, they're not identical because some people will respond better to one than the other. So I don't discourage some people from working, obviously, with their GP and getting them on some thyroid medication. The challenge is some GPs will look at their blood work and say, no, there's nothing wrong with your thyroid. So you do have to get a GP that's a bit understanding and open-minded, that will look a bit more holistically at you, because I don't prescribe thyroxine or Utroxig, but some people certainly do benefit from that. So, yeah, it's not always that nutritional support will do the job. If the thyroid's gone, for example, you can't,
Yeah, I mean, my thyroid's fried. And I, so I often say I'd be dead if I didn't take my thyroid medication, but I'd be miserable if that's all I did.
Yeah.
I know I need my thyroid medication. One day, I don't know, I think my thyroid was so burnt out before it was detected. I think I had at least 10 years of low thyroid function before it was picked up, and then another 10 years of not managing it all that well. And so, I think if I've had 20 years of thyroid kind of suffering, I'm not going to be off medication anytime soon, if ever, probably not ever. But, yeah, if that's all I did, if I only just popped the pill, which is what I was told to do when I was first diagnosed, if that's all I did, then I know I wouldn't be. I'd probably have a collection of other autoimmune diseases. I'd be feeling miserable. I know that.
Yeah.
So,
and you, Annabelle, I have to say, having known you for so long, you are so healthy. You are vital. Like, your health gets better and better, and that's a testament to everything that you do. So you are a good advocate for people who are just starting out, because you've done it all and you've really improved your health, and and anti-aged. No, you can't anti-age, but you've healthily aged and you look younger than you did.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, that's evident.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel great at the moment, but I know that I know we talked earlier about the whole journey thing being a cliche, and I don't like using that term either, but it's true. Yes. It is that. Yeah. It has to, and it took me a long time into that journey to really accept that it's a lifelong thing. I think I knew that, but I hadn't accepted that, and so then it changes your approach to managing it when you think, well, actually I really do have to live with this forever. And maybe it's the process of getting older and realising that there are other health challenges that come along that, you can get to. It makes you more aware of health and vitality, as you say, and staying younger. But it helped me to accept the lifestyle changes, and once I accepted that this really was a forever thing, and I couldn't just do a short, it wasn't just about a quick fix. It really had to be about a long-term thing, and managing those expectations for myself. And maybe this is part of that high-pressured personality. It's probably really only been in the last few years that I've accepted that I'm not going to have health perfection.
Yes. No one does, by the way. That's a myth. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's a really helpful thing. Yeah. But I think my personality was, and I think because I've put so much effort into my health, that I'm looking for that perfect thyroid blood test result, the perfect, I've got to feel perfect, it's all got to look perfect. And I wouldn't have said that, but that's how I was acting, or if that's how I was thinking.
That certainly creates more stress for your thyroid.
Yeah, so we become our own worst enemies. But so over time, just gradually accepting that it's not about the health perfection. Well, thank you, Sharon, for all of your wisdom and insight and talking about things that we haven't covered yet on the podcast, like the neuroemotional technique and Neurolink, and we've touched on some of the personality stuff, but just to have that confirmed from your experience too is really helpful. So thank you. This podcast has been proudly supported by, me. I am fully backing my podcast and getting the Let's Talk Thyroid message out to you. If you are interested in purchasing essential oils, that is one of the ways that you can support me and I can support you, and essential oils can support your overall thyroid health and wellness. So if that's something that you would like to add to your health and wellness toolkit of resources that you can access to support you in a number of different ways, send me a message. I'd love to help you find what suits your individual needs and budget. Or you can head to annabellebateman.com and follow the links there to essential oils. But think digestive support, stress management, reducing your toxic load, all sorts of ways that we can use essential oils as part of our overall lifestyle approach to managing health and wellness. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Thyroid. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and share it with others that you know with thyroid problems. Let's get the message out there. If you'd like to connect with me further, the best place to do that is via my website, annabellebateman.com. From there, you'll be able to join my Facebook group, book a strategy session with me, download my freebie, and access any show notes for this episode. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
The information presented and discussed in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and should not be used as a substitute for proper advice from a qualified professional.